Milwaukee Bucks a bottom 10 front office. That, according to CBS Sports. Camille and I dig into the details and tell you why we think that's inaccurate. Coming up after this on today's Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day each and every day. You can hear me throughout the season on the Bucks Radio Network. You can find Camille throughout the year on the Locked On NBA show and the Technical Foul podcast as well. So as we teased, Camille, there is an article that came out from our friends at CBS Sports. ESPN gets a lot of hate. CBS a close second for the disdain and drawing the ire of Bucks fans. You got Bill Ryder, who's been very pro Giannis moving on. And now this isn't going to help things by Sam Quinn. But this came out earlier in the day on Monday, ranking all 30 of the NBA front offices. And I'm going to preface by saying this. We're not homers, right? I'm not going to sit here and suggest, well, the Bucks should be in the top 5. I don't think so. But this article has the Bucks not in the top 10, not in the top half of the league. Not in the top 20 of the league. Number 24 in terms of front offices for all of the NBA. And to me, the interesting part to all of this was the fact that this is a reoccurring ranking that CBS and Sam Quinn put out there. The last time they did this was February.
Mm-hmm.
And in February, the Bucks were ranked 23rd.
Yeah, so
in the time since then, they created cap space to sign Miles Turner. And yeah, they stretched Damian Lillard. But they created cap space to sign Miles Turner. They kept all their key free agents. They brought in other pieces as well. And they moved down one spot. Can you help me understand the logic?
Well, trying to think about the things that the Bucks front office can get knocked for, right? And why this can bring their overall ranking down. You think about the fact that, they don't really have too many draft assets. Like, okay, sure. That's something that you can look at and be like, we're going to give you a negative mark for this. You can look at the draft record for the Bucks over the last, how many years back do you want to go?
So you, me, and Frank were kind of talking about this earlier today, and we'll save the rest of the details because I think we're going to get to it in possibly a couple of shows with Frank, but definitely a show tomorrow with Frank. But we were bringing up the topic of mulligans on draft picks, and as we dug through it, I think they could ask for a mulligan on just about every pick since 2014.
Right. So, if you want to knock the Bucks for the draft record, all right. And we've already discussed how there have been split opinions upon what the Bucks did in regards to Damian Lillard to begin with, of you guys are going to have a lot of dead cap on your books for the next 5 years. So, all right. All of those things I can understand as knocks against the Bucks front office, which is, again, why I wouldn't expect them to be top 10, maybe not even top 15, but kind of maybe in that mix of between 16 and 20-ish or so, middle of the pack kind of, but maybe a little bit lower in the middle of that pack. But 24 feels a little too
feels
low.
A lot.
Yeah, that feels a little low. And again, I can understand it, but I feel like the front office also deserves the credit for the moves that they made to get to that championship in 2021. Every swing wasn't a knock out the park home run here, but the aggressive to be able to keep Giannis in Milwaukee. And the Bucks have been winning this team since 2017 at that too. So it's you can attribute a lot of that to Giannis, but also a lot of the team that they put around Giannis has made sense over the years. It's just been the last couple of years here where you've seen a few more struggles than what you did necessarily during that Bud era.
Some of the teams that are in front of the Bucks, I guess the ones that stood out the most to me, I saw a decent amount of pushback when we were lurking on Reddit, and this was posted to the Utah Jazz being there. Number 8 for Utah. those are the interesting teams when you look at the perception of
Mhm.
assets and, holding a lottery ticket versus actually scratching it off and seeing what did you win on this ticket. It could be $1 million. It could also be a loss of $1 on
Yeah.
it. And I think that's where we're kind of at with Utah. They pretty shrewdly answered the question Austin Ainge did about, are you guys going to be tanking this season? And said, like, I can guarantee you we're not going to see that. And people took that as, wow, they're going to play to win. What it really meant was, no, we're just going to trade away all the guys that are going to help us win, and we're going to play the guys that are going to help us lose. So they're kind of in this holding pattern of, yes, you're accumulating assets, but at some point you got to cash those chips in. It was not necessarily like we saw with Oklahoma City, because that was pretty rapidly that worked
Mhm.
out. But I think especially in this day and age of the NBA, that's the interesting part. You can only make so many picks, and free agency basically isn't a thing anymore. So creating this maneuverability in assets, we need to see something come of it. So that was interesting to have them as high as they were
Yeah.
at number 8. Some of the other teams, quite frankly, Orlando and Atlanta checked in at 15 and 16 with as big of a splash as they both made. I'm actually surprised they weren't higher on
Mhm.
this list. But you got the Brooklyn Nets, who kind of similar to what we just said with the Utah Jazz, and even more so, they made 5 first-round picks. And look, we can't evaluate what those players are. Didn't get high praise on the night of the draft for what they got from those picks. Got the Washington Wizards, the Pistons in front, the Charlotte Hornets in front of the
Yeah.
Bucks at number 20. Denver was 21 and the Lakers were 22. That was interesting to me because those are two teams. I think there's a lot of comps and similarities between them and the Bucks. But I think you could also say, come on, how are those 3 teams not in the top 20 at the very least? If you want to say Lakers aren't there because they got LeBron James because they're in Los Angeles, and they got Luka Doncic because we're still not quite
Gosh.
sure how
Yeah.
that Nico Harrison just gave them to him. But maybe the irony of all ironies is the team directly in front of the Bucks in this rankings is the Portland Trailblazers.
Honestly, I was surprised that they weren't a little bit higher in the rankings because the piece of business that they've been able to do here with ending up with Jrue Holiday and Damian Lillard on the roster after making the trades, plus you have the assets to go along with it, plus some of the young players that they have, where it's like they're building something in Portland right now. What that exactly is going to equate to is still up to discussion. But like at least you have like Abdia over there who you can look at and be like, if he takes another jump again, like you can have yourself a real guy. So Portland I thought might be a little bit higher there, but I can understand why they weren't. Let me ask you this. Were you surprised to see the 76ers in the top
Hmm.
10 of the GM rankings? Because
No.
like they have done great jobs so far in like the draft, but some questionable front office decision
Oh,
making
you
once
mean like giving Joel Embiid a contract when you didn't exactly have to give it
you
to
didn't
him, and
have to
now
yet.
a
Signing Paul
very
George, just some of
uh,
the coaching overturns there.
that and reading that profile that was put together on Joel Embiid doesn't really inspire
Man,
confidence. The fact that the Paul George contract went from biggest free agent signing in quite some time, and certainly last summer, to is Philly already thinking about how do we get out of this deal? I'm not surprised because, and I'm not saying it to slam Daryl Morey either. He's clearly been one of the best GMs and team presidents in the league for his tenure with multiple teams, but he's one of those guys that is he's in with that club of Daryl Morey was the originator of the advanced stats nerd that's running a front office,
yeah.
and in with all the blog boys. So I'm not surprised that Philadelphia got the love that they did. I do want to get into the why, and we can talk a little bit about the draft picks as well. Again, neither of us are saying the Bucks should be in the top 10. I I do think a front office that is intact, and albeit Wow, 4 years ago already. Just a couple of days ago was the anniversary, Camille. 4 years
Yeah.
ago already, they won a championship, but they won a championship, and they've been one of the most competitive teams in their conference for, I mean, whatever you want to term it as, if we want to take out the last couple of years, but still they've been in the mix. At the very least, you got to be in the top half of the league. So we'll take a look at some of the why and why CBS placed them at this spot, nearly in the bottom 5 in the league, and also get to some of the comments that most of our viewers left yesterday, which quite frankly surprised me vis-a-vis Kyle Kuzma. We'll get into that conversation coming up after this. If you've ever wished managing your money felt easier, it can be with Monarch Money. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch Money puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Keep an eye on those expenses that pile up. Maybe you never discovered just how much you're spending on food deliveries or subscriptions. You can easily track that down with Monarch Money and find where to cut those expenses. If you're managing money with a partner, it's easier than ever to do so as a duo or an individual on the app. And if you got that one financial goal you're planning for, Monarch Money helps you take the steps to get there. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. So again, number 24 is where the Bucks ranked here. And a couple of the bullet points. Bucks get points for creativity time and time again, which is true as we've had that conversation, man. Every time it feels like John Horst and company are up against the wall, boom, here's Damian Lillard. Boom, here's Jrue Holiday. Now it's boom, here's Miles Turner. They managed to pull a rabbit out of the hat briefly to satisfy Giannis. Nobody saw the Dame trade coming. John Horst pulled it off. Viewers suspected they could snag Miles Turner. They did that too, but now they have to pay the price of $22 million to Damian Lillard for the next 5 seasons. The kicking the can down the road approach is where they seemingly were really dinged. You know, talking about, hey, it was good to bring in Miles Turner. He's a Brook Lopez replacement. He's younger. He's more versatile. But we keep coming back to that 22, which is, as we talked about over the weekend, actually becomes 20.3 or whatever it is at the end of the season. Still $20 million in dead cap space or dead cap hit on your roster. So here the money paragraph of, so what has the Bucks so low in these rankings? They don't control their first round pick until 2030. They're stuck with this dead Lillard money. And for a team that might be a top 6 seed in the Eastern Conference, but is more likely headed to the play-in tournament, they're all in on a team that's far worse than teams that have invested less. If you're going to be overextended like this, you better hope it creates a competitive enough team to justify those long-term losses. And that's not perceived to be the case here. I think there's a lot of nuance that gets applied to that. But, I guess where and this is more ownership as well than front office, and this is not me shilling for the team, but I have a hard time penalizing a group in a small market that has done everything it can, even with kicking the assets and the can down the road, I should say, everything they can financially and in terms of their assets to remain competitive. Like, no, they don't control their draft until 2030, but that's because they made the moves to bring in Jrue Holiday, which won them a championship, to try to do other things. And even PJ Tucker and the draft picks, the 4 second rounders you had to give up there, thinking and trying to do the same with Jay Crowder, which obviously did not work out, but 5 second rounders there, the Damian Lillard trade to try to do that once again. That, it would be one thing for this team to keep doing that, and I suppose we should be careful because maybe it's here, but to keep doing that and have Phoenix results, like obviously losing in the first round is not the intended result here, and it's not good enough.
Right.
But it would be one thing for this to just totally flame out and miss the play-in tournament in a bad Eastern Conference, even be in the play-in tournament. I mean, as we said, I'm not willing to pen that in right now. I still think you could make a case, hey, they're probably where they were last year, maybe even a little bit better. But that's where I just vehemently disagree with this, that you're penalizing them for things that resulted in a championship for this group and keeping them on the cusp of that for at least 3-4 seasons and saying, yeah, but now look at what's going to happen.
Yeah, and finding ways to continue to pivot when it doesn't feel like there's any more room to pivot from things that you've done. And the article begins by mentioning that an important trait, I'm going to read this, an important trait that was being looked at for the GM rankings here, the front office rankings, malleability, saying that there are a lot of front offices that have found success by following one single strategy. They look for similar types of players or make the same kind of moves again and again, but the smartest teams are the ones that can pivot as needed and aren't married to any single approach in an ever-changing league. And again, as you outlined with John Horst's record, like every move that he has made has not worked out. And we're not trying to say that it has. But one thing that I give John Horst a lot of credit for is that when things aren't working, he gets off of it. Like he is not going to continue to try to make it fit. He's going to make a move to try to figure out a way to pivot out of that. So for me, I think that you have to also acknowledge that part of the malleability of the Milwaukee Bucks of like, we're not going to sit in anything just because we have to in this moment. Like we will move out of it if we have to, like waving and stretching Damian Lillard. Like, yes, there are some negatives you can associate with that, with the dead cap on it. But one, you didn't see us doing this, did you? And two, it allowed the team to continue to make other moves to fill out this roster. And I can understand, I've said it time and time again, so I'm sure the everydayers are like, we know. But yes, the Bucks have brought back a lot of the same guys they had on the team last year, but how they intend to play with this group is going to be different. And I think that's the piece of it where it's like, oh, I think this could be a play-in team. Like, well, maybe they are, but there's the other side you have to also acknowledge of like, this could be a team that has home court in the East with how everything has shaken out too. So I think the judging is a little harsh on the Bucks. I think I might be a little bit lower on the overall front office for the Bucks than you might be, where I think you said like middle of the pack, but I probably put them like maybe right below the middle of that pack. But I think you have to give the Bucks front office credit for getting off of those moves. And if anything else to penalize them for too, I would say is probably like just coaching decisions since letting go of Mike Budenholzer and just how that has all shaken out as well. If you want to go that way, I'll be fair to CBS. I would add that into the mix.
Yeah, I mean, I think what makes it complicated is the 3 head coaches in the time span that you had, 3 head coaches, the drafting, as well as, we touched on, I pointed out before, it is not an or the excuse, but, you also have to view, okay, where are the Bucks drafting from?
Mm-hmm.
It's fair. Not, but also, look, we've seen teams drafting in that spot or behind the Bucks and in the second round, finding and cultivating talent. Like this is not the draft of the early 2000s or the 90s where it's just like second rounders, who cares? So it's not an excuse there. And the draft picks have not really worked out by and large. Like you've got maybe since Giannis, let's take that out of the mix because that offsets a lot of the draft picks that haven't panned out. But, year after year, you could look at guys and say, well, 1 or 2 picks later, there was this guy. The irony being Kevin Porter Jr. was selected with a pick the Bucks at the time owned, part of a trade, and now he's back in Milwaukee. But that was the other big point is their draft history hasn't been great. Sure, they've, found a lot of success with guys on minimum contracts, but that's largely because there aren't really any young players that they've been developing that are going to bite into any of that time. So guys you're signing for the minimum know they're going to get a lot of playing time and can potentially turn that into a larger contract. I mean, again, okay, but isn't that a feature? Like not necessarily a flaw, at least half and half. So that was my challenge with all of this ranking. There are nits you can pick, and even more than that, there are things that you can seriously criticize and question. But I think there's just as many that you can praise with their creativity, the way that they've been able to keep this team competitive as best they can. And the one thing that struck me the most too is, if you haven't read this article, you can probably skip the last paragraph and a half because it's more the usual rhetoric of Giannis's looming free agency and what the market is going to be for him and other teams that are going to try to pry him away. But just pointing out that it feels like the vision has been focused entirely on keeping Giannis rather than actually building a complete winner around him. And there is probably some truth to that. But I just think, number one, I think that shifted this offseason. Like, this is the offseason where it felt like there was a pivot with the younger guys and the play style that on paper, at least, it seems like this is what we have to lean into. And we're not star chasing or star hunting. It's Giannis and these guys. But I think the most difficult parts to try and parse from that and try to have a conversation with anyone outside of Milwaukee on that front is, I mean, you just don't know unless you're here. Like, you don't realize how much this guy changed everything.
Yeah.
And arguably kept this franchise in Milwaukee and his value here that, like, yeah, I would do the same and say we're going to do everything we can to keep him because, the assumption is when Giannis is done, it's probably not going to be pretty. So if that's the case, I'm going to extend this thing as long as I can.
And that's why so many teams and whatnot are looking at that Bucks 2031 32 pick. Like, I would like to get a piece of that if I can, please, because who knows what this franchise looks like when he's not on the team. But yes, I'm all for the Bucks continue to try to maximize the time that they do have here with Giannis, because as we have mentioned before, like, we had to wait 50, and by we, I mean the city of Milwaukee had to wait 50 years in between championships. Like, it doesn't come quick. It's not always easy, especially in the old NBA of dynasties and trying to fight as a small market team and celebrating the signings of Jrue Gooding and things of that sort as they come along. To now you're at a point where we got to see a generational talent on the Milwaukee Bucks so cold at the game of basketball that he had all these guys considering Milwaukee as a buyout spot, considering Milwaukee for the vet men spot. And that was something that was unheard of like 10 years ago for this team, where it's like, yeah, Milwaukee could be a buyout spot for some of these guys who can affect winning on a contending team. So, like, you got to take some of it with a grain of salt a little bit, because the small marketness of it all does play a part in it that might not be in the configuration of the rankings overall.
Yeah, it's I still think middle of the pack is more than fair for this group for the number of things to criticize and equally as many positives. I mean, this team won a championship, and there's a lot of teams in front of them and front offices that are ranked in front of them that have not done that. So I think that does count for something. You mentioned a couple of interesting names that I want to get to something unrelated, but also, as we mentioned, a lot of interesting feedback on the Kyle Kuzma point and discussion that we made yesterday on the show. So we'll get to that coming up after this. So when you were mentioning names, Camille, did you see, I believe it was yesterday, within the last couple of days, it was the anniversary. Obviously, it was the anniversary of a big event with the Bucks winning the championship. And I believe today is the anniversary of Giannis pulling up to a Chick-fil-A and ordering a 50-piece. But did you see the anniversary post from the Bucks from 10 years ago, with some of the names that you mentioned just prompted me to, oh yeah, I remember what those days were like.
I
The
didn't see
old
this post.
the like off-season welcome to Milwaukee. This wasn't off-season, this was trade deadline, but still it just reminds you of the point we made of where this team came from to where they are now in the welcome to Milwaukee. Michael Carter Williams, Tyler Ennis, and our guy Miles Plumlee. Like that's where it started. So that's why we do get pretty defensive and stick up for our guys in Giannis.
Absolutely. Like I mentioned, I went back to watch that 2016 Bucks game, Kobe's last game in Milwaukee when Giannis had the triple double, to kind of see the formation of point Giannis. And going back through some of the names that were on the team, one, let me say, Miles Plumlee was actually hooping in that game. This was shortly after the Bucks had made the switch to put Miles Plumlee in the starting lineup and put Greg Monroe on the bench when the Bucks signed Greg Monroe. I remember that being such a big
What a
free
day.
agent deal.
Up until the championship in 2021, like that was the biggest celebration I remember.
Greg Monroe, and it's crazy how quickly the NBA went away from back to basket bigs. Like shortly after the Bucks got Greg Monroe, but yeah, it's been a long journey. Like when you think about going from Brandon Knight to Michael Carter Williams to Eric Bledsoe to Jrue Holiday to Damian Lillard, like the pathway that we have been on here just to get to this particular point. Like there's been a lot of names and a lot of guys along the way that it just didn't work out. And again, a championship in 21 makes it all worth it.
You remember the Miles Plumlee giveaway, the toothbrush holder?
Yes.
Like those were the times. When you go back to the Bradley Center for those, the Larry Sanders blocks that they gave out for his quest for defensive player of the year. Quite an era, quite a timeline there for Bucks basketball. Really quickly here, I was surprised, and now that I say this, there's probably going to be a ton of updates to the comments afterwards that lean in a different direction. But I was very surprised with our viewers and listeners. We asked you to leave your thoughts on the small forward position, indirectly Kyle Kuzma as well. And I got to say, Camille, I saw a ton of belief, maybe hope, but combination of hope and belief of, look, I think it's going to be a bounce back season for Kyle Kuzma.
I was surprised with the level of optimism that was in the comments as well. But like, I can understand where it comes from. We've mentioned on the show ourselves of just like what it was like for Kyle Kuzma to make the transition from Washington to Milwaukee, what was required of him along the way. And the parts of his game that were actually like, hey, that's a pleasant surprise. Like, I didn't know you had that in your bag. Like, there is defensive potential there for Kyle Kuzma. And y'all know, like the everydayers know, I love Chris Middleton. He is one of my favorite players of all time, one of my favorite Bucks. But even just going for in this past season of seeing like the difference of having Chris Middleton on the floor defensively compared to a Kyle Kuzma, which is kind of like, wow, like again, a younger guy, a little bit more athletic, can move. So like, I get it. I definitely do get it. But the question that comes back to me is like, if you're saying you're thinking that there's going to be a Kyle Kuzma bounce back or the level of play is improved, what does that look like if you try to distill it down into numbers? Like what's actually expected of Kyle Kuzma, and how much does that change if it's starter Kuz at the 3 versus maybe it's Kuz coming off the bench in that role? Like what do those numbers look like? And I think that piece of it is going to be kind of interesting to see. And I'll be really curious to know what our listeners think of what a bounce back year for Kyle Kuzma would actually look like by the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, looking forward to Kuz getting another go at it. Shouts to our viewer in Iraq too, saying he agreed and concurred with that. A couple of I'm with yous. I hope you're right in there. Even I'm telling you, Kuzma is going to surprise people this season. The funny part is he might even average 12 points a game. But that's what it's gotten to. And I mean, I think we're both in that camp too. I think he will be better. And, I think quite frankly, he has to be better, not only for himself and for his, but this team is going to need that. Your point too of him basically being a Giannis zero, basically like a Coke zero who's off the bench filling that role for Giannis. I do think that's where he thrives. And just again, hearing John Horst say or reading him say that Doc went and met with him, I went and met with him. We wanted this guy. This was part of our acquisition. It wasn't just the mechanics of getting under the second apron. I mean, that was a part of it, but we targeted Kuzma as well. I don't think it's lip service. Now, whether or not it proves to be accurate to do that, that's what we're going to find out this season. But yeah, I think what does bounce back mean is the next logical talking point. So we'll get into that discussion coming up a little bit later in the week. I mentioned we're going to have Frank on. I believe he'll be on tomorrow's show to share some thoughts on Summer League. He was also constructing, I don't know if he tweeted it out yet.
The Summer League 5?
It's
out.
He put it out. Okay.
It's out.
He was giving us a preview of it a couple of days ago. So Frank has his Summer League recap in GIF form via Seinfeld. And I always hesitate to tease other guests too soon in case something falls through, and we may be butting up against that situation as it is right now. But as it stands right now, we're going to have Chris Johnson on the show this week as well to get him back on here and share his thoughts on the offseason and Summer League, but a few things we have to iron out there first. So a lot still coming up this week. Leave your thoughts on the front office rankings. Where would you put the Bucks on this list? Do you think 24 is accurate for CBS? And we'll address those coming up on the next couple of shows. That'll do it for today. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.